You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Home Field Apparel.
Welcome back to Crimson Cast. Galen Clavio, Scott Caulfield joining you. It is Saturday, November 16th. Scott, it's the bye. And yet Indiana still won.
I know.
As we get news this morning, early on, that Curt Cignetti has signed a contract extension. Indiana stepping up to the plate, getting it done. We are still digesting all of the news right now, but we're excited to be talking about this. I texted Scott. I was like, Scott, we should do an emergency podcast. And Scott's like, I just got out of bed. Like, I haven't been on the internet yet. What's happening? So we're catching Scott up on the way here. But this is great news. Right off the bat, Scott, we can react to the top story. Curt Cignetti, according to reports.
Wait, it's not about the Tyson fight? Sorry, I thought we were talking about Tyson Fear. Yeah.
That deserves a whole different podcast, I think. But no, $8 million a year. Average annual compensation for Curt Cignetti in this new deal, along with a $1 million annual retention bonus. We'll talk about that a little bit later on and what that means. Contract runs through 2032. So, Scott, they have managed to lock up Curt Cignetti for the rest of the decade and then some, basically 2 additional years onto what he already had. And, well, just first off, it's great finally to be able, when people say or ask, like, well, what are you going to do when Curt Cignetti gets picked up by a bigger school? Now we can say, hey, suck it. Don't need to listen to you on that at this point. I guess let me get your initial reactions on all of this so far, Scott. What are your thoughts?
Oh, man, it's awesome. I mean, it's fantastic. Cignetti has a plan. Cignetti has obviously turned things around. This is the best season Indiana's ever had.
Yeah.
And by the way, like, it could get better. Like,
right, yeah.
if they win next weekend, which isn't out of the realm of possibility, then suddenly it's like, this is a pretty good deal.
Yeah.
I have a ton of thoughts about him leaving. So if people have been asking me about it, the last like 5 or 6 weeks, so I definitely have takes. But here's the high level thing: is initially people might think, for those of us who are fans and like Cignetti, it's like, this is great. The other side of the coin is like, oh man, you just lock yourself in. It's like, well, yes, but Indiana also needs someone to drag them into high-level football. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not saying it's not going to work, but even if things don't end great, it's like the Tom Allen thing wasn't awesome, but what it did do was raise the price of our coach, which able to get us a coach like Cignetti.
Well,
and I'm not already being negative, but it's like, even if things don't work out fantastic, you're still showing like, all right, IU's willing to pay $8 million a year for a coach, which means we're in the echelon that we need to be in as a football program.
I think that's a really good way to frame it, Scott. I mean, it's one of those things where you have to keep in mind that what Indiana was paying Cignetti this season was a significant raise over what he was making at James Madison. Like, I heard a lot of people say he's only the 49th highest paid coach in the country. But look, he was the 49th highest paid coach after having made like $650,000 a year at JMU. Like, he took a big jump there. So, this was not necessarily going to be somebody who was only going to be cashing in because, this was a cash in already as far as he was concerned. But the number that is being talked about here, $8 million a year with basically a $1 million a year kicker, this is really interesting stuff. If you look at the top highest paid coaches, I'm going to go ahead and call this up. I'm not sure how well it will actually show here. But for those who aren't watching, actually, that's not showing very well at all. I'm just going to take it off and move us back to where we were. But if you go down the list of the highest paid coaches in college football, Kirby Smart's the highest paid. He makes about $13.2 million a year. Dabo Swinney's at $11 million. Steve Sarkisian's at 10. Lincoln Riley's at 10. Mike Norvell and Kalen DeBoer are at 10. Everybody else is in the under 10 million range. And when you look at $8 million a year, that's 15th, 16th in the country. That's more than Mario Cristobal makes at Miami. It's more than Mike Gundy makes at Oklahoma State. It's more than Jed Fish and Luke Fickell are making. These are numbers that really do indicate like this is a serious program that is going to go out and pay top dollar for a successful coach. And, you look, there are SEC schools who are paying their coaches less in annual salary. Billy Napier is only making $7.3 million. Mike Elko at Texas A&M is making $7 million. So, Matt Rule is only making $6.5 million at Nebraska. Like, these are big brand name football programs. And for Indiana, where, 10 years ago, as you kind of allude to, they're not paying much at all for head coaches, for assistant coaches. This is a huge amount of money. It's a huge investment in the program. And as we look at what Zach Osterman's tweet looked like earlier on, it's also about, continued capital improvements with the program. We heard the news earlier this week about renovating the stadium. It's about increasing the assistant pool. I think I saw that in one of the reportings as well. Just a lot of things being done in a very short period of time as Indiana tries to jumpstart this football program into an echelon financially where it can actually compete with the top teams in the Big Ten and college football as a whole.
Well, the other thing that I saw in there in the Indy Star report that I'm just reading is that, that IU is planning and going to get together to do a financial Memorial Stadium renovation, as you said, but you need Cignetti to run that program. Like, and this is the kind of news that can help. And I also like it because, again, if you're a naysayer, you could be like, man, hasn't even finished his first season. It's like, well, it's been a pretty good first season. Like, if you're gonna ask someone to get extended in their first year, like going 10-0, having College Game Day here, like just doing everything that we've done, this is pretty good. I mean, this is about everything you would ask for. The other thing is something that you and I have talked about for a while is, for Indiana to get to where we want it all to be, you can't just continually kind of go at a 2% increase every year. You have to understand that basically from when we went to college until, kind of the Kevin Wilson era, they just didn't focus on football. I mean, I guess maybe with Hefner, they started with the South End Zone, but like for a 10 to 12 year span there, they just really didn't focus on football. And they didn't focus on funding football. And then it focused on paying the coaches, paying the assistants. And so if you just go with normal increases, it's like, great, you're still 10 years behind. Like at some point, you're going to have to make huge jumps up to catch up with everybody else because you basically didn't run the race for 10 years and now you have to catch up. And so this is going to be needed at some point anyway if you wanted to really compete at a high level. And again, I go back to it's a short sample, but it's a pretty damn good sample of what Cignetti has done thus far.
Yeah.
And he's been, what I also like is that Indiana has shown they're not effing around, because you've seen even in just Cignetti's interviews the last couple of weeks, it's like, how are you able to get a program like Indiana? It's like, well, we have great support, but we got to continue that support. I mean, that's basically Cignetti being like, hey guys, let's keep this up. Like, let's not lose the momentum we had. And this is not losing the momentum for sure.
So let's go back in time a little bit. It was really very early on in the season where we started hearing people asking questions about whether Curt Cignetti was going to be leaving. And, really, I would say probably post Maryland or post Northwestern, those things started. They really picked up in earnest immediately after Nebraska. And that was probably the question I was getting most from fans. We got the question on the podcast all the time. I'd have family members contacting, asking about, what was going to happen, whether IU was going to be able to hold on to Cignetti. We never, or at least I, as we talked on the show, I never really put a lot of credence in the idea that Cignetti was going to go somewhere else. And there were a couple of reasons for that. A, I think people really underestimate the focus that Indiana has on taking their football team to the next level. And look, I understand why people would be skeptical that that was actually what was happening. It really is one of those situations after so many decades of not properly supporting it, leading up to, to like the 2010s, you have to show that you're actually going to do it, not just talk about it. But there were other things about Cignetti and what I had heard about him and his family and the kind of their overall response to the situation here that just made me think he wasn't going to be catching the first bus out or hopping on the first opportunity. One, he's got a really good deal here at IU. And what I mean by that is this. You have a lot of NIL money. You've got a great NIL collective that has seen steady increases in the overall amount of money they're able to throw around. Is it SEC level money? No. but it's certainly competitive money. And the way that Cignetti seems to like to coach and the way that he likes to select players, you may not need the absolute largest NIL budget, but this will probably help even add more to the pile now that it's secured that he's going to be the one managing the funds. The second, you're able to basically run the program however you want. I don't think people realize how unusual that it is that a coach is hired at a Big Ten program and gets to bring almost his entire staff from a group of 5 school that wasn't in Division I like 5 or 6 years ago, or it wasn't an FBS at least. For him being able to come in, establish the program the way that he wants, run it, not have a lot of booster interference. That's something that you deal with a lot at SEC schools and certain ACC schools where, the people that control the purse strings, the people that paid for you to be there in the first place want to have a lot of oversized control of the program you're running, want to have a lot of access. That doesn't really exist at IU. There's not a booster network that's set up for that. So you get kind of a blank check to do what you want with the program. And I think, that is both an advantage for Cignetti, but it's also, to some degree, I think why IU has capitalized so much on hiring him in the first place, because he was able to basically import his entire culture without having to deal with a bunch of outside influence. And that is a big thing that you're not going to get at a lot of other places.
Well, can I expand on this for a second? Because it's something I've been thinking about. I've talked to a lot of people off the air. I think you and I have the same mindset. I didn't want to get into a big Cignetti leaving discussion on our pod because I didn't think he was leaving. So it's like, what are we talking about? And I'm not really worried about it. I like you. My answer has been, I actually frame it very similarly to my discussion for the Pacers with Pascal Siakam. And here's what I mean is when this offseason, everyone's like, oh man, are the Pacers going to re-sign Siakam? I'm like, that's not really the question. The question is, where would Siakam go if he doesn't go to the Pacers? It's like, start looking at the teams that have the salary cap and that have a need for a guy like Siakam. And there's not a lot of options. And that's what I was thinking with Cignetti is that I felt like if you look around college football, if you're Cignetti, you're not going to leave for a school that isn't in the Big Ten or the SEC. Like all those other schools are just not in the same echelon. So then you've already narrowed the pool down to like 40 schools. And then if you're Cignetti, you're not going to leave to go to Purdue or Maryland or Mississippi State. You want, if you left, you'd want a school that was better than where you're at Indiana. And the list gets really small really quick when you start looking at it that way. Now, on the flip side, Indiana would have to step up. Like Indiana can't just take for granted and be like, well, you're not going to go to Florida and leave here for all the reasons you said. They have to step up. But I also felt that was at our advantage as well, is that if you're Cignetti, it's like you look at it, it's like maybe Ohio State would be a place you would go, maybe, Auburn or Florida. But then everything you said is true. You go there, there's going to be strings attached to the money. Here at Indiana, you've basically, in a matter of 10 weeks, recreated Bob Knight. On the football side, you can kind of do whatever you want to do. The last thing that I would say about it is, I just to frame this a little, and again, this is now no longer makes sense because he got the extension. But the other thing to think about too is, for as much as we love Cignetti and as much as I think he's the best coach in America, if you're, let's just pretend, Florida, Auburn, or Ohio State, you're Auburn, okay? If you want to make a run at Cignetti, but you can't do it now, but this is what I was thinking 2 or 3 weeks ago. If you're Auburn, those fans would be like, hey man, so what are we hiring? A 63-year-old guy who 2 years ago was at JMU, had a good run at Indiana on a soft schedule, air quote soft schedule. And that's who we're hiring. We're not going after Kirby Smart. Like there's an arrogance to those other teams that I'm not even sure they would want Cignetti, because they all could have had him last year and nobody went after him. I mean, and it would have been a wild hire for, Auburn to do that. But there's something there too, where even within his resume, there's just kind of this isn't a top level coach, which I think is helping Indiana get him. And now Indiana stepping up to keep him. But those are all the reasons that I thought he's not going to leave. But my only fear was, Indiana, the university, can't F around on this. Like you have lightning in a bottle. Let's keep the momentum going. And dude, they did it.
They did it. Well, and look, we've heard that Cignetti's wife really likes Bloomington, and actually Cignetti just kind of verified that in the statement that he made, where, he talks about how appreciative he is and his family is. I'm going to just read the statement here, actually. This was Cignetti in the response to the signing of the contract. I am beyond.
The contract sucks. That's no.
I am beyond appreciative for the tremendous commitment, confidence, and support from President Pam Whitten, Athletic Director Scott Dolson, Manette, his wife, and I love Bloomington and are grateful for how the IU community has embraced us. I look forward to leading this outstanding program and doing my part to continue the momentum for Hoosier football.
And every statement just, and Purdue sucks. Like, well, just, yeah. Purdue's been doing this, IU sucks for years. Like, just, he's like, make that ours. Anyway.
I think, and actually Patrick brought it up, I think it's a good point. There's a legacy possibility here with Cignetti. And it's interesting that he would be willing, because, again, what I think everything you said was correct about would he have been a viable candidate at some other places. But I think absolutely, like there would have been some big football brands, traditional football brands that would have gone after him because they wouldn't have been that worried about the money. But for him to say, you know what, we're not even going to wait until bowl season or playoff season. We're going to go ahead and get this done, in the middle of November. I think part of that has to be this idea of here we are. We're at a place that kind of mirrors my own career pathway in some ways. This is not landing at a top level institution and doing this. Cignetti, you listen to all these interviews he's done over the course of the last several weeks and months, and he talks so much about his journey and how unusual it's been and how he had to bet on himself and go to a small school, another Indiana, Pennsylvania, and then slowly work his way up this ladder, and he gets this Power 4 job. And it's arguably, one of the least attractive Power 4 jobs, particularly from a legacy perspective. And he does this in the first year. I mean, people, I don't think that if you can see that you can do this and you can win here, and if you're convinced that, hey, they're going to increase NIL, they're going to increase, do things with the stadium to make the stadium situation even better. We're going to get the practice facility situation taken care of, whatever it is. I think that there is an attitude from Cignetti where it's like, I would love to shove it in the face of the college football establishment that ignored me for so long and do it at Indiana, a place that nobody thought that you could do it. I mean, I got to think that in some ways, and this is actually where I think fans really stepped up after those first couple of games where there wasn't a lot of attendance. The way that the fan base reacted, almost filling for the Maryland game, the way they reacted for Big Noon, the way that they reacted for game day, the atmosphere that's been in there the last 3 games in particular, the fans traveling on the road. I got to think he looked at that and said, this could be my place. Like the support is there. People are excited. People do care about football in Indiana. This is potentially a place kind of like a Barry Alvarez at Wisconsin, where you can essentially become the reason why you became nationally relevant. And, that's really a fascinating thing to think about, because that's not how most people think. But so much about this Cignetti hire for Indiana has been unusual. You hire a 62-year-old that's a very old age for a Power 4 coach. I mean, go down the list. Look at the number of people who got hired. Most of them got hired in their 40s or 50s. To hire a guy from James Madison, that's a bit of a risk, especially when there were, probably higher level coaches or assistants you could have gone after. But this is just another kind of step in the unusual but awesome nature of how all this has come together for Indiana. And you just can't help but be excited by it.
You mentioned something too about, and I've heard this thrown around that, the Indiana NIL collective, even for football, has more money than you would really expect for a team that's had the success that we've had up to this year. And I think that's something that's also kind of funny is, people might look at this and be like, oh my God, Indiana, what are you doing? It's like, well, Indiana's got a lot of money. like there is a lot of money there. We are part of the Big Ten. We get our checks too. And, this is not funds that we don't have. We have it. And I know the amount of money that they're making at every home game now is exponentially more than they ever made before. And the train's going. And, you also have to give credit to Scott Dolson, Whitten as president. I would say with Whitten, it's definitely shown she's at almost every game. She's down there whenever they announce, a championship for like a golf team last game. Like, she's down there. We definitely have support across the administration for athletics, which I think it's fair to say has not always been the case at Indiana.
Not to that degree, no.
Yeah, I mean, there has been presidential support. At times it feels like there hasn't even been athletic director support for football. That's what I also am very happy with, is that you see across the board, the administration understands, hey, this is important, this is special. And, it's what you and I have talked about the entire time we've done this podcast, is how does Indiana turn it around? They have to have support, but then you need to get that coach like the Barry Alvarez, like the guy at Kansas State, Snyder, or
Bill Snyder. Yeah.
I mean, like you have to find that one coach who can come in, turn it around, and stay. And if you do that, you can get a nice little run. And if you're Wisconsin, you can change the paradigm. I mean, Wisconsin was nothing before Barry out. They were just kind of like any other Big Ten school. Yeah. Alvarez comes, and then suddenly they're Wisconsin, and right. They are just a perennial year in, year out power. And then it actually extends to the entire athletic department at Wisconsin. So these can be seismic changes. So I just think you have to give credit for the administration for understanding this. But again, I go back to, this isn't like we just made him the highest paid coach in the country. Like, this makes us a competitive mid to high mid-level Big Ten team. So the idea of like, oh my God, what are you guys doing? Like, just so quick. It's like, well, we took an advantage to kind of use a situation that's very advantageous to help pull us into the strata that we already needed to be in anyway.
There's a couple of things I think that are worth reminding people of, and I've talked about these on the podcast before. I was talking with some friends within the university the other day, and they said applications for freshmen at IU are up like 10 to 12% over this time last year. That is football doing that. I mean, and this is something that when you think about that cinematic open for the Michigan game on CBS.
Oh, I know, it's awesome with the
you think about you think about all of those images coming from the Washington game, coming from the Nebraska game. The amount of free advertising that you're getting for the entire university through the conduit of the football program. This is the thing that people often forget about when we talk about the high salaries that are getting paid to coaches, or the money being paid now to players via NIL, is that the reason why there's so much money in this, the reason why Indiana makes so much money from television, is that there's, what you're trying to do as a college athletic department, or as a university in general. Why do you do college athletics in the first place if you're a university? Think about the universities that don't really, like the Ivy League schools. They don't need to go advertise themselves. They already have the name recognition. Everybody wants to get into Yale or get into Harvard or whatnot. For the rest of the schools that are out there, you're engaged in essentially a marketing war with every other major school in the country. And, I've told the story before, like when Butler went to those back-to-back national championship games in basketball, they saw a huge increase in applications, particularly out-of-state applications. You've got kids from Indiana going to Alabama, going to Georgia, going to Florida, going to these southern schools. Why are they doing that, even if they're not necessarily the top academic programs? Well, because it's fun to be on a campus that has a great football program. And you cannot have been in Bloomington or on campus at any point this fall without having felt the palpable buzz that is coming directly from the football program. Like, I was walking out of my office the other day, walking through the sample gates, and there's like two what look like college freshman girls with taking videos of themselves, saying like, "We win, Google us," out of the blue, randomly. It's like, right. We got people doing SIG memes in front of the sample gates on like a Thursday in a bye week. Like that level of culture and excitement is what students want. All of these universities, they have their great points and their not so great points in terms of their academics. Indiana's got a lot of great academic schools. I teach in one of them, but you have to understand how this business works. And this is where this administration, I think, has made the investments that kind of get Indiana back to where they were in the 80s and 90s, when they were a national brand because of how prominent the football or the basketball program was. You're on television constantly, you're winning titles. You got people that are coming from all over the country to come to IU because they want to be part of that. That's exactly what you're seeing. But football is just so much exponentially bigger, Scott. And it attracts so many more people. It includes so many more people. And that's why it's exciting that Indiana, over the course of really of the last 15 years, but absolutely with what we've seen over the last 12 months, has finally decided that this is the business we have to be in, and we're not going to take any half measures in doing it.
Yeah, and as you said, the money's exponential. I heard this from someone within IU that, up to this year, the most money that they had ever made from concessions at one game was $450,000. Now, obviously, you have beer sales and inflation added to some of this, but this season alone, at just the Washington and Nebraska games, they made $800,000 at each game. So, you're doubling concession sales. Those are real numbers, and those are things that can continue. And, this is also, you're getting to a point, and I think we joked about it a couple weeks ago, but as they talk about this Memorial Stadium refresh, there is a world where it's like, all right, if you can, obviously you're not going to keep this level of, we're not going to be in the college football playoff every year, but if you can keep the floor at 6 or 7 or 8 wins, there's a world where like, all right, maybe we not only refresh the Memorial Stadium, let's add another 20,000 seats, because now you get, that becomes 1.2, 1.4 million a game at, concession sales and ticket sales. It's not an absurd thought at this point now.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because there's always trolls. There's always people who are like, oh, are they going to keep the assistants? Or, hey, well, what happens if this is like Mel Tucker, which it won't be Mel Tucker 2.0, but like what you and I think talked about this, or maybe it was somebody else I was talking with. I'll note, if Curt Cignetti wins one less game next year than he's already won this year with Indiana, that season would be tied for the second best season in program history. That's where you're at this point with this program, and the stability you get from this, the ability to go out and get recruits. We saw last night, Indiana flips a cornerback from Colorado, 4-star. It hops their recruiting ranking up to 39th in the country. Now's the time. You mentioned like expanding the stadium. This is where I think you get the luxury boxes that we've needed forever. You figure out a way to build those in. The capacity of Memorial Stadium, I think you wait a few years because you want to make sure that you can build this momentum, make the ticket a harder ticket to get. Then you can think about, well, do we need to expand the stadium? Most people are going the other direction. The live in-person audience across the country, unless you've got one of those mega stadiums, is probably at about the 65, 70,000 range regularly. But to me, it's about how do you capitalize on bigger ticket items within the stadium? How do you get donors? It's so easy now, as you know, Scott, to get down here from Indianapolis.
Yes.
It's like a suburb basically at this point with the interstate. To be able to say to the business owners up there and the people that are interested in watching good football, let's get you some suites in Memorial Stadium. And hey, you drop, $25,000, $30,000 or whatever on one of those. Well, you've bought a lot of concessions just with that, in terms of equivalencies. So
Shluby suites. Yeah.
Shluby suites. Yes, exactly. So look, there's a lot of things I think that Indiana can go with from here, but getting Cignetti nailed down was important. And this is where, what I think we've seen at Indiana as much as anywhere, and you see this at a bunch of other places, certainly, but you look at the examples at Indiana, the argument that a program wins or loses, or that a program is ultimately responsible for the success or failure of itself, I think has always been a bit of a misnomer. There are a couple of programs where it seems like that, but realistically, it's all about who the coach is. What can the coach do? And that is more important. And I would say, look around the country at some of the places where people are having success. Like Georgia for years was a contender, but was never a team that could win beyond a certain level. They hire Kirby Smart. They give him a few years runway. He wins multiple national titles. Clemson had the exact same issue, and they hire a coach that's able to get it done. But you flip the script, look at what Lincoln Riley is struggling with at USC. You would think USC, that's a program that just wins on its own, and it doesn't matter who the coach is. And yet, since Pete Carroll, they have struggled time and time again to properly hire somebody. We saw this with Alabama, post Gene Stallings, where they went through coach after coach after coach until they finally landed on Nick Saban, and Saban made them great. But a lot of people conflate that with just Alabama being great. And I think you can go down the list with a lot of the coaches that are out there. So when you have a coach like Cignetti, When you've lucked into hiring him, and I mean, look, Scott Dolson deserves a ton of credit, but it's still luck that he happened to be available and interested at that particular time, right, and that Indiana managed to scrape together the funds to fire their coach a year early at a huge expense, a $15 million ultimately expense. Like, the stars had to align just right. So when you align those stars just right and you get a coach like this, the worst thing you can do is, pussyfoot around with the money and say, well, is this guy actually worth that much money, or is it 6 or 7? You've got to, and I think we know enough about Cignetti now. This isn't like a one-hit wonder. This is sustainable. The fact that he's doing all of this with an array of transfers and leftovers from the previous roster. This isn't even a chance for him to build his own roster yet. He's basically had to scrabble all this together. The fact that IU was smart enough to get on this early, because they had to have been working on this for a couple of months leading into this, the fact that they got this done early is so key. You don't even let a guy like that consider going out the door. What do you need to do to make it worth his while to be here? That is so important, and all you have to do is look around college football to see why.
Well, and I also look at it, I often think of this when we're playing a game. It's like, what does the other team not want us to do? It's like a 4th and 2. And it's like the other team would hate for us to go for it. Like, that's what I want to do, is to go for it. You think of the other teams in, our phylum of, we're still probably not at the level of Ohio State or Penn State. But you look at, Purdue, Illinois, Northwestern, Michigan State, those teams, if they're looking at this, like I kind of how we looked at Jeff Brom at Purdue. It's like, man, he's got something going there. Like, he's figuring some stuff out. What I want as an Indiana fan is for him to leave. Like, I would like to see them have to try and recreate that again. If you're a Purdue, Illinois, Michigan State fan, you look at this and it's like you're probably talking about, he's going to go to Florida, because you want that to happen, because that would be great.
The Purdue fans are not happy on Reddit right now. This has not been received particularly well by them. Yes.
Oh, what's their take? IU sucks. Let me guess.
Well, no, they're just, I think one of them said, this is the worst possible timeline or something like that. It's, I mean, that's the thing. You want your team to make the right hire and then do what they need to do to retain that hire. And it's a little more of a blank slate with a place like Indiana, and we'll see. You never can tell how these things are going to work out long term, but I don't know anybody wouldn't love to be in Indiana's position right now with all of this.
No, I agree. And I mean, I stand by, we did a similar podcast. Let's call everything true. We did a similar, maybe not with as much love, but a similarly positive podcast when they signed Allen to his extension, because at that time, Allen had turned things around. And, I stand by our feeling at that point, because again, we are so far behind in spending on coaches and assistant coaches that you need someone to drag you there. And even if it didn't work out with Allen, that was good, because now we were paying, $3 to $4 million a coach, which allowed us to get Cignetti, like I talked about before. And if this, if things don't work out in a couple years, I still will stand by this podcast, because it shows that Indiana is a place that commits to football. And if you do things right, we will really commit to you. Again, I think there's more things at play here where this feels like this is going to work for the next couple of years. But, the only thing I would tell fans and is that, next year is key, but it's also like, just because we don't go, if we win 7 or 8 games next year, that's not a step down. Like, this year is so special. And every year we're not going to be competing for a Big Ten title or the college football playoff. Indiana, our goal is to get to 6 or 7 wins a year, go to a bowl, and then every couple years, can you pop and have the season that we're having now? And I think that's what we got to keep at. But I think we need to keep that in mind next year, because I'm assuming next year we're also not going to start 10-0 and have the same run. There might be a couple more bumps. That doesn't mean that we made a mistake.
Yeah, I mean, and to wrap things up, because we've kind of hit all the salient points here, but my feeling on it is as follows: if you're going to be in the business of doing this stuff, you better do it right. And again, when you're talking about donations, when you're talking about people being invested in the program, both emotionally and financially, that doesn't just happen on its own. This is now the opportunity to build a culture around football the way that there's a culture around basketball that still exists. I mean, basketball, even though basketball hasn't had anywhere close to the level of success in the last 25, 30 years that it had in the 30 years before that, it still draws huge crowds. It still draws a lot of money, a lot of donors, a lot of interest. You're starting at the ground floor essentially here with football, but you're doing it with a guy who's already grabbed the attention, not just of IU and Hoosier Nation, but of the nation, the entire nation of college football. Indiana has become like the feel-good story of the season. Everybody's paying attention to them. And this, as you said, like this shows assistants, that might be coming here, because certainly a lot of these assistants that Curt Cignetti has brought with him are going to be getting looks as head coaches in various places. You want to try to hang on to Mike Shanahan. If he doesn't have a head coaching job that's out there, you don't want him to be tempted to go to an SEC school. You want to hang on to a Brian Haynes. I mean, you've got all these people who are clearly integral parts of the success. And I'm sure Curt Cignetti can replace some of them if they end up going. And the natural order of assistants is they're going to go find, new vistas or try to get head coaching jobs of their own. But to be able to be competitive in the salary pool for assistants is certainly something that we're going to be seeing. Indiana, if they're going to make this much of an investment in the head coach, you're almost certain that they're going to make those same levels of investment with the assistant coach pool. And that's been kind of the big leverage point for a lot of college football programs is we can pay our offensive and defensive coordinators 7 figures. We can pay, a really good strategist on either side of the ball a really high amount of money and retain them rather than constantly having to go out and try to find new people to fit in. It's going to be fascinating to watch Indiana compete in this environment because it's just not something we're used to seeing.
And let's just call it what it is. They have the Big Ten TV money, but the Cignetti towel right there, those are selling for $150 on eBay. So if you're IU, you just buy another batch of 50,000 towels, throw them on eBay, and like there you go. You got the money you need to make. I mean, they have it there. Sig towels are going to pay for all of this.
Well, Scott, I'm glad I was able to roust you out of bed and onto an emergency podcast this morning. Great news for Indiana, obviously, and congrats. Yeah, and congrats to the Cignettis. It's been a joy watching this thing develop over the course of the first few months of the reign. I'm just excited that this is going to be something that will extend for quite a while into the future now. I was talking with some friends last night, and one of them said on text, it was something that I also agreed with, which is I don't think I can go back to what Indiana football was before what we've experienced this season. And look, I'm not expecting 10, 11 win, 12 win seasons every year. That would be ridiculous anywhere. But to be consistently in the 8, 9, 10 win range, to be able to jump up to that next level and be competitive, because right now you've got that setup, and to have a coach that clearly I think is going to be someone that can continually put Indiana in that spot, that is really exciting. And to be able to not have that hanging over us as we roll into this offseason is really, really one of those things that I can't put it into words how happy I am that this has been taken care of by the institution.
And I just want to, yes, and let's just take a moment, because I don't normally hop on all the previews with you. There's a world where Indiana beats Ohio State. Like it feels insane because we're still in the season, and it's like us going into Columbus winning is crazy. But I've been telling people this, I think that we'll compete. I think we'll play well. I don't think we'll win. But if you talk, this is fever dream level. If we win this next Saturday, first off, it's like, this looks like chump change. Like, this is like, all right, this is the greatest deal ever. But secondly, I will come out on after that game being like, we're the number 1 team in the country. I mean, Oregon's got to win at home against Penn State. We got one on the road. We're better than everybody. And I mean, it's like, that's what's insane, is that's what's at our feet right now.
Indiana signs Curt Cignetti to an extension. He'll be here through 2032, $8 million a year, plus a $1 million retention bonus every year. So effectively $9 million a year. Heady times in IU football land, and certainly about the best news Indiana could have gotten on the bye week. Thanks to all you folks for tuning in. We will be back later with more content surrounding this. We'll talk about it more during the week. We'll also have some previews as Indiana gets ready to face Ohio State at the Horseshoe. For Scott, I'm Galen. This is Crimson Cast. Thanks for joining us, folks. We'll catch you folks on the flip side. Bring back the Bison. Stay never daunted. So long, everybody. Thanks for joining us this morning, everybody.